So thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And as I was asking the previous question in the chat, obviously it's because I was very intrigued, and I'm intrigued with lexemes, and I will mention them very shortly in my presentation. I'm going to show what we do with Wikibase as a data sharing space, what the data sharing space is, and why it can be a good way to extend the coverage of Wikidata and also Wikimedia Commons. So we are creating a system, a database in Slovakia that is connecting on the left hand public services related to music, on the right hand private services. So for example, in this case, we have the Slovak Music Information Center's database, which has composers and their works, and we are cross-checking if we know about all of their works that was registered with the SOSA Rights Management Agency, in which libraries can we find loanable scores of this work, and on what kind of streaming platforms or other platforms can we listen to the works of Iris Segi. So we are trying to connect together databases. So we are using Wikibase as a kind of a broker. We call it a data sharing space because we are accessing different databases with different structures and different rights to query them or write to them. And we want to find a way to understand how an artist's work is represented in each of them, and if possible, improve what is available on public graphs. This service in a very provisional format is available in this hudobná databáza escape domain. And what we're trying to do here is basically with Wikibase to create integrated services which follow the European Interoperability Framework. So we are not only creating a technical and a semantic possibility to connect services together, but also we're understanding what kind of organizations or workflows are necessary, for example, to loan a score from a library, and what are the legal requirements. And I think that these second two elements will be very interesting to extend how we could bring a lot more reliable information to Wikidata. What we are trying to do, so of course, the Wiki universe is great in open data and open knowledge. We are trying to connect together different spheres. So we have open science sources, we have public sector information that in Europe and in the United States under a different legal basis is deemed to be open. And then we have a lot of private data that might come out to the sun. And we try to negotiate this with the Wikibase infrastructure. I just want to give a comparison what this might bring if we do this well. Europeana, which is this European GLAM platform that connects a lot of data sources, was able to collect over 10 years as much data about European music than Spotify in a day. So if we are able to tap into public and private databases at the same time, I think we can create much better services and much better data quality. So what I want to focus on in this presentation is how we can use Wikibase as a kind of alternative curation mode that actually serves as a staging area for Wikidata. So in the projects that I'm going to show you, it's going to be 2 projects, not only the Slovak one. We are eventually sending new and reliable data to Wikidata. We already sent some, and we will send a lot more. But some of this data or some of the photographs or other assets are not necessarily ready yet, just yet. So And because something is currently not available for open, that doesn't mean that it will never be. I mean, the Public Domain Day is celebrated in many countries and many Wikipedian communities who are eagerly waiting which photographs or music or other cultural assets will become public domain on the first day of January when the copyright protection term expires. I think that what we do is something similar. We are looking for data that might become open soon, and we're trying to figure out what are the circumstances that can make the data open. Excuse me for my voice. The reason why I'm interested in lexemes is that the original idea for what we are doing came from the Wikimedia CE meeting, not this year, but a year ago, when the Estonian, Finnish, and Hungarian Wikipedians had a little side event. And we were talking about why certain ethno-linguistic minority groups of the Finno-Ugric languages, like the Veros, were able to create successfully a very active user group. They got out in a year from the Wikipedia incubator, and they have a lot of content, while others, like the Livonians or the Mari, are there for almost 20 years in a stale environment. And we were thinking about ways how we could facilitate to bring these small minorities' knowledge to the Wikimedia platforms. Besides the, excuse me again, the Slovak example that I showed, we created this Finno-Ugric Net system that if you are clicking to it, you will get to a semantic browser. And this semantic browser is linking back to a Wikibase instance where we are storing data about certain small minorities, music, films, clothing, photographic history, and publications about them. It's very interesting content and very difficult to find. It is not only folk music, for example. We have Udmurt folktronica and Mari ethnopunk. So small communities that do not really have usually a presence on Wikimedia. So we wanted to create an alternative way. So we thought that, well, the incubator works for some communities, for others not, especially for very small communities with very few active users of the language left. And we decided that we will set up a MediaWiki and a Wikibase installation that is very similar to the big incubator, but it has different rules, and probably it will attract more or different content. And that is, and that eventually, excuse me for this. So eventually we have these Wikibases that are serving as a content negotiation platform, and as much as possible they are sending to open platforms data and other cultural assets through a very complex architecture that I can talk about for people who are interested. And the essence of this is that our central Wikibase is able, with different rules, to log into the Slovak National Library systems, the Slovak music rights management systems, in some cases to the Slovak Ministry of Culture's databases. And of course, we can access Wikidata, we can access Europeana. And we're using this negotiation to find out where the data might be wrong or missing. So there is a data enrichment and cross-checking element in this. But we're always focusing on that, well, if we found the information, is it possible to actually disseminate it to the public? Is it possible that we put it to Wikidata? Is it possible that we put it to Europeana or the European Data Portal? And then, of course, until now, I think that some people probably even heard my presentations about the ambition of how we're doing it. The heart of this is that we have to have a different kind of rights management with both data and the assets, I mean the photographs or music that that the Wikimedia platforms use, and the more complex one. So I would like to start with the easy case, which is like photographs. If you are checking out our data sharing space, you will find there very nice photographs, contemporary ones as well as old ones. And well, they have a different legal life. So the first case is this called Livonian Bride. It's coming from the National Museum of Finland. It is in the public domain, and it also is available on Wikimedia Commons. Here, we just have to acknowledge and understand. We have to find the information, for example, that the author is already dead for more than 70 years, or something happened that made this public domain. In the center, there's a picture that I made available. I'm obviously a living person, luckily. So in this case, we have to somehow configure that information that I gave permission. That's very well known to everybody who's uploading images to Wikimedia to the Commons. But the third one is something that is the interesting case, that we are finding and receiving data about images or about objects that do not have an already known public domain image. We're describing this image. If possible, we're trying to get a preview of this image, and we try to understand what are the conditions to make this public. So, of course, one thing could be that, well, we're lucky and the next public domain day in January 1st will just expire the copyright term and we can go along with it. But in this case, what I put into the third one is that we had to negotiate a license with an ethnographic museum, which takes some time. All in all, what I wanted to say with this is that that we are trying to model into the Wikibase, into the graph, and this could be also done in Wikidata, the kind of information that actually helps us defining when we can release to the public something. So we are using a simplified version of the provenance models and Provo. And in certain cases that I will briefly touch upon, ODLR, which is a permissions and policies vocabulary in the World Wide Web. The provenance of things actually captures something that happened to an object, or what happened to a photograph, for example. An important activity or action is that the creator of the photographer died at a certain moment. And if we know that this happened more than 70 years ago, then we can infer that this picture can be put out to the public. And sometimes in our case, which I will show examples to, well, there are, we cannot put it to the commons. It's not going to be anywhere near a public domain or a CC BY license, but it has probably permissions that in many cases you can still enjoy that music or listen or view that picture. So we are building Wikibase instances that are annotating the provenance of where we are getting data or cultural objects. And we are also trying to create as much as possible automatically or programmatically permissions to use the data. And obviously, again, this can be put into the system, into the graph itself. And you can even infer if a photograph that you already know about is in the public domain. That's relatively easy if the photograph has a creator and we have a date of death for the creator. And then there are more more complex cases where this will not work as well, and there I made a mistake with these slides, so I will just explain it in my own words. I put the wrong Sparkle query here. So there are cultural objects, for example, music that has 3 rights holders. It has an author, but the performer and often the producer also has so-called neighboring rights. So, for example, a single Creative Commons statement wouldn't even allow us to upload it to the Commons. I'm trying to upload music excerpts to the Commons, and currently the rights management is, I think, too simple for that. But we can create properties, and we can create a description that manages these more complex scenarios where it's not a single person who can give a Creative Commons agreement to uploading the picture. So after this little bit boring and legalistic things, some examples that we are doing. So in our Finno-Ugric Wikibase instance, we are describing Livonian music, and we have put there information from the Latvian folk archives about some sound recordings, and where there was no legal obstacle to do it, we started to put them on Spotify, and also some of them are already available on Bandcamp, and we created this possibility that it can have a very wide audience with this player. We also have MP3 or WAV files that are downloadable with Creative Commons licenses, but unfortunately not the ones that the Commons would accept. They are more restrictive because they are only for non-commercial rights. But anyways, with this description of what we are finding in an archive, we can progress slowly, making a lot more things available than we thought would be possible. And then this is more just an interesting case that I'm working on with my colleagues in this case, is that, as I said, well, if you're talking about photographs or your work for talking about simple data sets, the rights management can be easy. But if you're working with music, you might have a lot of assets connected to a folk song. In this case, we have a lyrics file, we have handwritten and printed scores of the music, and we have several recordings of the song. They actually differ in what you are allowed to do with them. And that's how we are trying to create several pathways to making available this kind of cultural heritage to a wider and wider audience. And at last, I will finish soon my presentation, and hopefully there will be some questions. So the other area where I think starting to build a Wikibase that has different rules than Wikidata and carefully pre-staging information that can go to Wikidata or the Commons is GDPR. I think that anybody who worked with GLAM data realizes that GDPR caused a very big confusion in the last couple of years because it entered into force in Europe with a retroactive power. So basically, what we see that we have museum or archive websites that have information already out on the internet that wouldn't be allowed by GDPR currently. And that puts basically those GLAM organizations that would be our most trusted partners into a very awkward situation. They might be held liable for breaching GDPR. So we are working a lot on adding information about GDPR as well, GDPR-related things to these assets. They are related to copyright because usually we have to identify an author as a person, or a performer as a person, and then we also have to figure out if we can say anything in the public about this person who is our performer. But anyhow, that's another thing that I think would require a more consistent modeling, both in Wikidata and if you're building a Wikibase, is the data protection aspect of rights. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that this is how we are building data sharing spaces in Wikibase. So data sharing spaces in the sense that we are connecting different databases that have valuable and interesting data that we hope that eventually to the commons and Wikidata. And that was my last slide. So thank you very much. And hopefully you have some questions too. And
thank you very much, Daniel. That was super, super interesting. I really appreciate it.